Testing concepts. In other words, what do you gain? What are you able to test from these prototypes? The prototypes allows the designer to check whether what they've made matches user requirements. Does what you planned to do in your user requirements, the dream, does that work in practice? And if it doesn't, it allows the designer to go back and to change things, to rethink key areas, to ask the client for clarification, because it may be that the designer gets halfway through this and then realizes, actually, I'm not sure that's what the client wants. Let's go and ask him or her. And again, it's a way of avoiding taking expensive miscalculations into final production. Early testing of the product means you can show it to your target demographic, to your target audience, and you can gauge their reactions. What do they like, what don't they like, and why, and make changes. So this is different from the game not actually working. We're talking here about gauging player interest. Is you might have a perfectly working game, but then when you give it to some testers who are in your target demographic, say for example the game is for 14-year-olds, so you give it to 10 14-year-olds and they start playing it and go, oh, it's dreadful, it's really boring, or it's too hard, or it's too easy, or it's not interesting, or I don't like the characters, and you start to get that feedback, which means you can then go back to the drawing board and change those elements or those features before taking it into production. Examples. Perhaps the tester likes the main character but dislikes the attitude of the main character. The villain's exciting but the narrative is dull. And although you can discover these independently of gameplay, you can present them, for example, to their target demographic, but probably the best way of finding out is to give them a playable version of the game and to get their feedback. But each time you do this, you create another loop and you take it one stage further towards completion. If you haven't gauged player interest, you don't know whether your game's going to be fun to play or engaging. So clearly it's really important. Think about all the big game production houses, the game designers, this is what they do. You find out whether or not your game is any good and whether players like it. Because if they don't, there's no point in putting it into production. Skill level required. You can't play a game through reading user requirements. You can't guesstimate challenge or difficulty or exhilaration by reading user requirements. It only happens by making a working prototype of the game and actually playing it. J. Barnard Gilmore refers to, he says that play refers to those activities which are accompanied by a state of comparative pleasure, exhilaration, power, the feeling of self-initiation. What does that mean? It means the game needs to be enjoyable to play. And we talked again about that balance between the obstacles being frustrating but pleasantly frustrating, and that you feel exhilaration when you overcome the obstacle. And user testing is the only way of actually finding out for sure that your prototype, what you had planned using in your user requirements, has actually come to fruition and that it works. So it should enable you also to find out how difficult it is to play at the start, how much scaffolding needs to go in place at the beginning so it's not too frustrating, but also so the first levels aren't too easy, the right level of difficulty. Gauging this level of difficulty is so important in games because there's got to be the right balance of challenge and frustration. And it'll, again, all of these will take you a bit closer to working out how long the game will take to produce. And that's so important, knowing when you're going to put it in production, knowing when it's going to be on the shelves. Is an achievement achievable? Are the achievements that you put in there, are they too frequent? Are they not frequent enough? Are they in the correct place? Do they match the user requirements? So each time you can go back and measure what you've achieved against the user requirements. And don't forget, when you get to D2, you'll be going back and actually looking at what you produced and what you said you were going to produce and the user requirements against the brief. How many of those did you actually meet? Is your game exhilarating and fun to play? Does your game give away something educational about the environment? How many of those criteria, the key criteria set out in the brief, did you actually reach? Interface requirements. By creating a prototype, you should have buttons that complement each other, buttons that are clear to read, easy to understand. Are the calls to action consistent? Are they intuitive? Is it intuitive to use? Are the menus easily navigable? Are the menus similar? or do they change across the game? Are they clear in purpose? Are the forms arranged logically, and are they easy to use? So all of these are questions that you can answer in terms of interface clarity as a result of looking at the prototype or creating a prototype and then user testing it. Now, in terms of gameplay goals, don't forget, in your user requirements you will have set out what the goal of the game is. The purpose of the game, the goal of the game. Creating a prototype allows you to work out whether the game works. Do the rules work? Or do the rules clash against each other? Is the game easy enough to understand? Are the goals easy to understand? Is the gameplay, are the rules explained well enough? And going back, you will have been able to have written a set of rules better through actually producing this prototype. Are there now new ways of expressing the rules based on the gameplay and having actually had a good look at what the product is like to play?